Cool.
Welcome everybody! Woo! Woo! Workshop. Okay, so purpose of this workshop is Liberty is coming up with whether you're going to Liberty or not. There's a lot of competitive opportunities, and I was kind of inspired by this doing Joe and Justin's competitive workshop, and like for context, I'm an anxiety specialist, I'm a psychologist, and I was just kind of seeing all of the different like manifestations of anxiety that have been going on within myself and within everyone else as like a natural component to competing. And I figured why not kind of lead this workshop, because there's so many kind of misconceptions around how to deal with either anxiety or adrenaline overlapping kind of challenges when it comes to competing. And I just wanted to kind of spread the information out there, because once you know it, it's so effective. But when you don't, a lot of the traditional ways of treating anxiety are maladaptive or like iatrogenic, meaning like you're trying to help and it ends up making things worse. So I just want to kind of, spread that cycle out. I'm going to break down the challenges that your brain and your body might present into kind of 3 different categories. And knowing the type of challenge that you're experiencing, because there's not, everyone's brain is different, is really important in figuring out what tools would work for you. So we have adrenaline, and that's kind of the simplest conceptually one. And adrenaline is just, when you have the endorphins in your body, when you have like the cortisone and the norepinephrine and things like that that are just coursing through your body that cause your muscles to tighten up. So you have kind of less, less nuanced control over your muscles. So that's one category. And then when it comes to anxiety, there's going to be an umbrella term that I'll break down into several parts, but the 2 main ways that I would differentiate anxiety, 2 big words for simple concepts: ego-syntonic anxiety and ego-dystonic anxiety. So syn means same and dys means different. So ego-syntonic thoughts are thoughts that you kind of rationally agree with, right? If I really truly insecure that I'm a bad dancer and I'm heading onto the dance floor and my brain says, you suck at this and you're gonna mess up and everyone's gonna laugh at you, and that's something that I actually kind of believe, that would be ego-syntonic anxiety, right? But if I'm really confident with myself and like, I know I'm not like a pro, but I know that I'm appropriate for my job and everyone loves me and no one's gonna laugh at me, but my brain is still telling me, you're gonna mess up, everyone's gonna laugh at you, like you don't deserve to like, hang with this crew. That would be ego-dystonic anxiety. I don't believe in these thoughts, but my brain won't shut up around kind of the anxiety that I'm experiencing. Now, in terms of, I'm gonna get into a little bit of like class optional participation. Caveat is, this is being recorded, I'm gonna upload it to YouTube, so there's no HIPAA protection here, so there's no need to participate. If there's anything that's like vulnerable, there's no pressure at all. But it would help me kind of determine the ratio of what I want to focus on. If folks could kind of let me know, generally, do you feel like the challenges that you experience are adrenaline, ego-syntonic anxiety, or ego-dystonic anxiety? I have my guesses, but what are folks' experiences when you hear that breakdown? Syntonic. Dystonic.
Syntonic plus adrenaline.
Syntonic and adrenaline.
Yeah, I think syntonic is adrenaline.
Syntonic adrenaline.
Maybe it's my thoughts aren't really coherent. I just know I get really internal. So
Okay.
I'm not sure.
So it's not cognitive, like it's not like words that are in your head, but it's more like physiological and things like that.
Yeah.
Right. So I'd say that's maybe a combination of like adrenaline and maybe some ego-dystonic kind of like, anxiety, because a lot of times we think of anxiety in the form of words. We'll also talk about, there's a lot of ways to break things down. Sometimes anxiety is words in your head, sometimes it's emotions, sometimes it's images or like GIFs or like kind of looping images or movies or things like that. So also understanding the way that your brain is generating things is important for how you practice it, but we'll get into that in a second. Okay, So largely egosyntonic anxiety with a little bit of dystonic and some adrenaline too. I'll definitely go into the skills of all of them, but it helps me kind of figure out the ratio. So let's talk about the egosyntonic anxiety first. That's the worksheet that I uploaded on the Partiful. And as kind of an introduction of it, when we're experiencing egosyntonic anxiety, it's not that our brains are that distorted. It's more that the content that we're looking at is myopic. It's just a fraction of like the overall data set. And that's what we try to fix when we're working with egosyntonic anxiety, right? A lot of times, if viewed in like a very small scale, the statement that we're making, like I'm a piece of shit dancer, is correct in some context. Like we're not stupid, but it's not taking in the whole factor, right? I am a piece of shit dancer if I'm comparing myself to champions and things like that. But I'm not looking at the wider context that I've been in this for like a year and a half, and I'm exactly where I should be on like a normal curve or something. So a lot of times when we're caught in these spirals, figuring out the ways in which our brain is not using a larger data set could help us kind of ground ourselves and bring ourselves back to reality. So the list on that Partiful, and maybe we could kind of go through it one at a time and talk about some examples of the ways that the brain kind of operates when it comes to this and dance, is a list of unhelpful thinking styles, also called cognitive distortions. And let's just jump into it, and then we'll talk about it. It should kind of be immediately apparent how it's useful. But I think the first one is like black and white thinking, right? Black and white thinking being thinking in extremes, right? I'm a terrible dancer or I'm a champion, right? And I'll go through this one, and then the rest we'll go over kind of collectively. Each one should almost kind of automatically inform, like once you identify, okay, I'm doing some black and white thinking, the opposite should be kind of quickly apparent, right? So thinking grayscale of, okay, there is a nuance, there is a spectrum. I am neither a perfect dancer nor a terrible dancer. You know, I'm somewhere in between. Could be much more helpful there. Who can read or maybe if we're comfortable, William, you could read the second one and we could just kind of go in a circle. But you could read that, like let's say the second one would be the top right, and then we'll go
Well, if you
second
scroll
row.
down, those are the list.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I'm just operating off of the image itself because the
okay.
image is like the one I have like half memorized. But yeah.
Cool. So the second one is overgeneralizing, seeing a pattern based upon a single event or being overly broad in the conclusions we draw.
Okay, so what's an example of how that could pertain to dance, competitive dance? And anyone can answer any of those, yeah.
It's like if you don't perform well at one event, like allowing that to
Exactly.
take over your whole.
Right, and that could be on a large scale or a small scale, right? If you don't prepare at one event, going to the next event thinking that is like how I am, that's my baseline, and that's going to inform me as a dancer. It could be in a single heat, it could be in a single song within the heat, or it could be like in a single moment, you know, overgeneralizing, and the first 30 seconds of the dance aren't going well, and you're like, this dance is fucked, and like your brain starts to fail, right? So again, like understanding, okay, my brain is overgeneralizing, getting really familiar like with these terms and being able to identify pretty quickly, okay, so I'm just gonna tag that thought is overgeneralizing, like let's ground ourselves back into reality. That's a way that it can be helpful. Great, yes, next.
Disqualifying the positive, discounting the positives that have happened, and only focusing on the negatives. I definitely do that a lot.
Yeah, so are you comfortable sharing an example?
You
When it
could
comes
be
to-
having a really great night and then mess up one step and the rest of the dance just goes terribly and, you know, retreating
Exactly.
and just being like, I'm not gonna dance anymore. And
Right. And that's a perfect example of how we're not trying to think optimistically. Like the cure to the pessimism is not optimism, because optimism is just as inaccurate as pessimism. We're not saying you're a beautiful flower and everything that you do is perfect, because the brain is going to know that that's not true, and it's a very indefensible kind of position to take. We're just trying to think rationally, right? So in that disqualifying the positive, we're realizing that we're not weighing all information equally. it's so much easier to weigh like the negative information more heavily and to discount the positive information. So the cure to that is just to think rationally and holistically to be able to incorporate all of it. Next one.
Yeah, mental filter. Only paying attention to certain types of evidence, so noticing our failures but not seeing our successes.
Yes.
Yeah.
So a lot of these overlap. Some of them will like breeze by because they're kind of very similar ways of talking about the same thing, and it's so similar to the one before it.
Yeah.
Next one.
Jumping to conclusions. The two different kinds of this distortion are mind reading, thinking that we know what someone is thinking, or thinking that, and fortune telling, predicting the future.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so how might that apply to dance?
Maybe if like someone, I don't know, you're getting halfway through a dance and you're like, oh, this isn't going well, like they must hate me, they must be having a bad time.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's huge, right? It's the on the particle, the first. Yeah, assuming that we know what the person is thinking. People have way different like default expressions. There's a very common like kind of stoic dissatisfied expression that I think a lot of dancers have that can mean so many different things. Most often they are just internal. Like I know that when I'm really focusing, I'm just like I have this dissociated kind of look on my face that I'm sure can convey to somebody else that like I'm very unhappy with their dance, but it's truly I'm just kind of focusing on my own body, and I know that that's so common, right? But it's also just as common to perceive that tabula rasa, like that blank slate, as just putting all of your fears and insecurities onto it, and like this person must hate me, and then kind of getting into your own head. So reminding yourself of that.
I was gonna say, like, in the beginning, I put a lot of stock into people's facial expressions, and every time a lead made a face at me, I was like, oh, it's because I messed up. And then I learned, oh, a lot of them are making me faces because they themselves have messed up.
Yes.
And it's like,
Yeah.
oh, okay, like and I'm sure, like, when they see me laugh, like, some of them are like, oh my god, is she laughing at me? And it's like, no, because I just, like, did something silly and I messed up.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
So we're both triggering our dance partners and being triggered by it, and like it's all mixed, like misinterpreted signals that's being sent 99% of the time. Okay, next one.
Next one's magnification or also like catastrophizing and minimization. It's blowing things out of proportion or inappropriately shrinking something to make it seem less important.
Yeah, I think that's another one, unless there's like a unique thing that's sent out to people that kind of very overlaps with the stuff that we have been talking about so far.
Yeah.
But great, yeah.
Oh yeah.
Assuming that because we feel a certain way, what we think must be true.
That's emotional reasoning, right?
Yeah.
Okay, yes, emotional reasoning. So, emotional reasoning is like if I'm going into the dance competition and I feel this sense of dread, that means that things are going to go bad, right? It is, if I feel anxious, that means that something's wrong. If I feel insecure, it means that there's something to be insecure about, right? It's taking the fact that your body has produced an emotion as evidence for like something in reality, which is not true at all, right? Our body produces emotions all the time, and while it's important to develop an ability overall to be in touch with our emotions and to like slowly over time like notice like emotional patterns and explore those, it's just as foolish to make the snap judgment of in this moment I'm feeling this and therefore it means, and to just make that connection, right? Especially when it comes to a highly kind of psychologically arousing kind of situation like competing in dance. How many? There's like two more? Three more. Okay, yes.
Should, must,
Mhm.
using critical words like should, must, or ought can make us feel guilty or like we have already failed. If we apply shoulds to other people, the result is often frustration.
Yes. Okay. So, what are some like shoulds or musts that people have in their mind when it comes to dance, practicing, growing, competing?
They shouldn't knock me on my face.
I should what?
They shouldn't knock me on my face.
They shouldn't knock me on my face.
What?
Meaning.
They get elbowed basically. But
Oh yes. Well, that's probably a fair one as it should. But
Other
yes.
partners should anchor correctly.
Right. So the shoulds for other people, right? It could be judgments
Yeah.
for ourselves, but we could also have these like expectations of if I'm dancing with somebody like they're messing up in this situation and focusing on, I expected my partner to be like X level and they're not meeting my expectations, and now I'm feeling like frustrated and distracted by that. Absolutely be part of it.
Like I should be a better dancer with how much practice I've been doing.
Yes, very common one. I think everyone is like, I've been put in, I think that's basically a ubiquitous
Yeah.
should that people experience of like, I should be further along. And yeah, should is this like non-objective reality that is just always unhelpful and just not tied to any sort of pragmatism. Okay, next one.
Labeling, assigning labels to ourselves or other people. I'm a loser. I'm completely useless. They're such an idiot.
Right. So kind of same thing, right? It's taking something that is infinitely complex, like a human being, boiling it down to one thing. Whether it's a partner of like this person's a bad dancer and like increasing this frustration, or it's yourself of like, you know, I'm an idiot, I'm stupid, I'm incompetent, etc., etc. Same thing. You know, it's myopic. Like there's truth in everything. We're all an idiot and we're all stupid in some areas if you're just viewing a subset. But you're reducing the complexity, and again, like the cure to this style of thinking is just incorporating the full scope of information. We're not countering that pessimism with optimism. We're just looking at all of the information.
Personalization, this is my fault. Blaming yourself or taking responsibility for something that wasn't completely your fault. Conversely, blaming other people for something that was your fault.
Mm-hmm. And how might that apply?
I think again, like in the beginning, whenever I would mess up in the dance, I would just automatically assume it was my fault.
Mm-hmm.
And then eventually, like as I got more and more experience, I could like aesthetically into the lead. But so like you know,
Yeah.
every single failure in the dance, I did attribute to myself, like especially early on.
Right. And then, and I think a lot of us kind of gravitate towards that, like perhaps the like sophisticated evolution of that line of thinking is most people blame themselves exclusively. Then they start to understand when it's like the partner's fault, and then they start to understand that it's more complex than one person's fault or another, but there's environmental factors, there's sleep, there's which song it is, there's just kind of the match, there's so many different things, and then suddenly the paradigm of fault and whose blame is it becomes less and less of just a useful or relevant question even. Okay, so the way again that this tool could be used, I would suggest sometimes when I'm working with like patients or things like that, I say put it as like the background or like the wallpaper of your phone or something. Check it kind of multiple times. It's one of those things that is useful to have just in muscle memory to be able to kind of understand the ways in which your mind gravitates. Everybody uses all of these unhelpful thinking styles, but some people's brains gravitate towards some more than others. And just understanding like the 3 or 4 that your brain goes to the most frequently or the most useful for you to be able to identify, you'll start to catch yourselves like multiple times a day, or especially like on the dance floor or something, utilizing that unhelpful thinking style. And really like once you've identified it, you don't really need to do much else. Like identifying the illogical thinking style in some ways is like the flip side of the coin of like coming up with a more rational conclusion. But if it's helpful for you to state the more rational conclusion, that could be useful too. Does anyone have any questions around that before I move on to different types of anxiety?
I think sometimes on the like should and must stuff, I get a little bit looped around that in my head, because if I want to be good at this dance, there are some things I should do.
Yeah.
But there are also some ways that are not helpful to think about that. So if I'm trying to, I guess like, sometimes I get wrapped around trying to differentiate should in a technical sense from should in like more of an unhelpful thinking sense.
Yeah. I would replace any use of the word should with would like to.
Okay.
Should kind of comes from this like perceived other, you know, like over parent, like helicopter parent kind of
Yeah.
voice in our mind of like this is right and this is wrong, versus I would like to, I would prefer to, like it's within my goals too. And then it becomes more like self-oriented, and then you get to choose like I would like to practice more and I'm feeling burnt out today, rather than I should be practicing today. It's the same kind of statement. We're still absolutely keeping our values and what's important to us, but by kind of switching that language, it switches like the energy of it a little bit. And I think that should help. Ellis, who came up with like a lot of this list, says like you're shitting on yourself, you know, like
Yeah.
using that should has a much more like judgmental kind of context behind it.
Cool. Nice. I like
Yeah,
that.
Other thoughts
I have many.
or questions, I guess. Okay. I mean, there'll be time after also, but we'll get through. Okay, yeah. So, most people said that they identify with that like egosyntonic anxiety. The thing is that what I just spoke about can also be misused and induce more anxiety if you're using it in the wrong way. And that's one of the things that I really wanted to talk about today, is the difference between control strategies and acceptance strategies when it comes to anxiety, right? Everything that we just spoke about is very pragmatic and very useful, and what I'm about to say doesn't take away from any of it. And if you are trying to identify your unhelpful thinking styles and combat them on the dance floor, you will make your anxiety worse, likely, and it will kind of increase the distress. The reason for that is a lot of the anxiety strategies depend so much on the spirit of the law rather than the letter of the law. If you are trying to address your anxiety to a degree to which there's a hope that this is some magic bullet that if I say this word, if I identify this like unhelpful thinking style, then my anxiety is going to go away, and I'm going to keep like debating this in my mind so that my anxiety goes away, you will only induce more anxiety, right? Because that's how panic attacks happen. If anyone's ever had a panic attack, I guarantee you that you didn't experience a panic attack because you were totally calm 1 second and then you experience panic the next. There's always this ramp up time where you're experiencing some low level of anxiety, you notice it, you kind of freak out about it and you try to control it, you realize that, oh my God, I can't control it, in fact now it's getting worse, you try to control it even more, and then it gets worse. There's a snowball effect where you try to put out a fire with gasoline, right? So, what we want to do when we're experiencing anxiety in the moment is more of like an acceptance strategy of making space for the anxiety. No matter what, when we're competing or when we're in these situations, or if we're just like living human breathing beings with a pulse, we're going to experience unwanted emotions, thoughts, physical sensations, urges, etc., right? If we're trying to experience this like perfect like internal condition when we are dancing or performing or in life, again, it's an impossible task. You're going to experience frustration and you're only going to increase the amount of distress that you're experiencing. That brings us to the ego-dystonic and adrenaline kind of solutions, which is more of what's called an expansion exercise. I'm drawing from acceptance and commitment therapy, which is a cognitive behavioral therapy, just so you know the background, but a few resources about that are also on the Partiful, but not useful to pull up now, just you could check later, and it's all like duplicative content of what I'm talking about right now. In terms of the expansion exercise, what that is what we were talking about with the type of anxiety that you were talking about before, there's a whole slew of different challenges that the brain can present, right? There are intrusive thoughts, you know, those are words in your head, you're a bad dancer, you're going to fail. There's emotions, and that could not just be anxiety, but it could be guilt, it could be shame, it could be anger, it could be frustration, it could be depression or sadness, like it could be very complex. There are sensations, like physical sensations, there are urges, like run or fight or flight or freeze. So when we are experiencing those like in vivo, in the moment, the more useful strategy is to allow those thoughts, sensations, emotions, etc. to be, right? It's really the tightening up of the body or the mind and the trying to suppress or repress those experiences that amplifies them. Again, like trying to put out a fire with gasoline, right? There's two images that I like to use when it comes to the feeling of how this is going to work, and then we could jump into an experiential exercise so we could like really actually practice it. The one that I like the most is if you're trying to play a game of tug of war, we're instead trying to just drop the rope. You know, we're not pulling harder, we're not letting it win or something like that. We're just kind of giving up the battle of trying to control. Or if like with the cognitions and the arguing back and forth and trying to like get our mind to shut up, instead of playing like a game of chess and strategizing what move to do next, we're trying to be the chess board. We're trying to be kind of the environment in which those battles might argue back and forth, but we're not really taking place on either side. But either way, it's a much more kind of passive, mindfulness-based, like accepting approach that's much more useful in the moment. So how do we do that? Then it kind of depends a little bit. I'll give like this overarching kind of thing, but it depends a little bit on the manifestation of your anxiety. If your brain is making thoughts, it's allowing the thoughts. If your brain is making kind of physical sensations, allowing the physical sensations. And I'm going to focus on the physical sensations today because that overlaps with the adrenaline. We can kind of kill two birds with one stone. That said, what is most useful first is to kind of induce a little bit of anxiety. So what I'd encourage people to do here is to, with your consent, and you can jump into this or not, and you can just observe. But close your eyes, picture yourself either waiting for a dance or you've just stepped onto the competitive floor, and start to bring about any of the fears or sensations or experiences that your brain and your body kind of produce in that moment. And really kind of bring it in, trying to like induce any amount of distress. We only need like a little bit of anxiety to work with this, right? Next step is noticing where in your body you're noticing that distress. The most common answer is that there's usually like this pit that's like, in the chest or something like that. Maybe your throat is tightening up. Maybe you feel it in your head. And now, instead of trying to get rid of that distress or that discomfort, what we're looking to do is almost breathe around it, right? Making space for it. If you notice that your muscles are tightening up around it, like you're clenching, kind of protecting like that weak part of your body or getting ready for a punch, loosening those muscles around it, breathing around it, giving it space. And maybe it could help to just notice that discomfort, almost like you were an interested scientist just taking notes on a specimen. What is the size of that distress? What is the shape, if it had a shape? Could you trace the boundaries around it? And does it spread to your entire body, or are there parts of your body that are totally unaffected, right? Can you feel that distress in your calves or in your forearms, or is it really concentrated to one area? And working on just letting it be there, gently, compassionately, giving it full permission to exist. Just watching and noticing. And each time you notice that your brain gets wrapped in to trying to argue it away or trying to tighten the body around it, when you notice that you've picked up that rope again and you're playing that game of tug of war, just trying to drop it gently over and over. When you're ready, you can open your eyes, and if anyone wants to kind of discuss what their experience was there, if they were able to induce the distress, if they were able to change their relationship with it at all, I'd love to hear any feedback there.
It was like a this tight.
Yeah, it so often is, like that tight us right there.
And it's very dense.
Yeah, sure.
It's weird. I think I was anxious about something else like this.
Sure.
Really.
Yeah. And do you feel like you were able to kind of allow that density to be there rather than like judging it or trying to get rid of it?
My shoulders dropped.
Okay. So you noticed just physiologically, like the rest of your body started to relax a little more when you were allowing for the discomfort, right? Which is the opposite of what we think, right? We're letting the discomfort in, and that's reducing distress rather than trying to get rid of it to reduce it, right? Great. Anyone else have similar different experience?
Yeah, I was able to feel like this warmth kind of spread through my body. So it felt like it was stuck up top, and it was really released a little bit, and then I kind of let go a little bit more, and I felt like a rush through the whole body, like all the way to my feet. So it's kind of interesting.
So you letting go of it kind of gave this like almost like energized experience to your body, which
Yeah.
might be like just a positive association of like, oh nice, like I could. Hopefully it's good energy rather
It was
than like
good,
more
yeah. It was good.
adrenaline. Great. Yeah.
I think I need to practice it a little bit because I think I was intellectualizing it too much. Like,
Yeah.
Am I accepting it right?
Yes. Okay. Great point. And the practice leads us directly into kind of the next section. Oh, I timed everything great. Which is, this is a skill that needs to be practiced, right? Like right now we're doing it in a very calm environment compared to like a competitive environment or the social dance floor or something like that. And these are muscles that you can work out, right? There's brain studies before and after CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, which all of these tools are drawn from, that show that like literally the brain changes before and after going through CBT. Like the prefrontal cortex, the amygdala, like both of those are affected by practicing. So we can work out the brain just like any other muscle. And coming to a class, some of my research in grad school was around like the acquisition of these skills. Coming to this class will do absolutely nothing if it's just this class, right? The skill acquisition only comes from practice over time, right? Otherwise, you will have gained what's called like crystallized information. You kind of learned something cognitively, but then those effects will just fade over time, right? There needs to be rehearsal and practice in order to kind of acquire these skills. How can you rehearse and practice? Well, if you rehearse and practice in this kind of environment, that's great. I think it will be useful. And in terms of generalization, it will not generalize as well as possible. This is why like I kind of have a hot take on like mindfulness-based meditation, where if you're practicing like focusing on your breath with your eyes closed in a quiet room, it is both useful and you're really building up the skill to focus on your breath in a quiet room, right? But then when it comes to being in an anxious situation, it's so much more challenging that those skills might not generalize. So a great way of trying to generalize these skills is to recreate the situations that you want to practice in as closely as possible, right? That gets into the form of therapy called exposure therapy, which is my bread and butter at Buffalo, right? And exposure therapy is exactly that. Like, how do I practice the skills that we just learned? More the kind of expansion skills than the cognitive skills, because again, the cognitive skills is a useful overall skill, but in the moment you want to be using more of the expansion kind of, or also called response prevention kind of exercises. How can I recreate the situation that I'm struggling with as one-to-one as possible, and grind it out and practice it, right? So, ways of doing that, and thank you, Betty, for workshopping this with me. We tested out the other day, and it was great. There's an option here. I'll talk about it overarching, and then I'll give people some options on like participation. But first, you want to really recall the types of challenges that your brain produces, right? In terms of physiologically, people have different challenges. I think increased adrenaline is one of them. Some people get kind of dizzy or nauseous or tired or what have you, right? For increased adrenaline, I brought some 5-hour energies. So if people want to over-caffeinate in order to increase their heart rate and to practice right now, because we'll jump into some practices, I'm happy to pass those out. In fact, if you want to grab it now while I still yap.
So like,
Don't chug all of it. Maybe a few air sips, and you can pass around if you would like. It's totally optional.
it works really well.
But in terms of like increasing your heart rate and making you like feel like a mimic sensation of anxiety, I think that like over caffeinating like really works well. If you get dizzy, you could like before this exercise, you could spin around in circles and stuff like that. Or if you get like nauseous and stuff like that, you spin around in circles. Literally, like I used to have anxiety around like, and I would get like nauseous with my anxiety. And once a day, I put my finger down my throat and gagged and practiced like just feeling that anxiety in order to habituate to it. And like it only took like 2 or 3 days, and then like I was good, right? So, so what we're gonna do is like you've all just taken some caffeine to like increase heart rate. We're also gonna mimic things by, in addition to like, what we're gonna do is 1-minute dances going in cold, right? And that's usually the competitive environment of like you're waiting in line for forever. You haven't had time to like warm up, and your heart is racing, and then suddenly you're kind of, on the dance floor. I'm gonna play some crowd noises in the background as well, so it kind of mimics that experience of being in that kind of competitive environment. And
You're like walking in a circle with your partner.
yes.
And then you line
So
up.
Betty suggested like, the lining up and like the really putting yourself in the headspace. And for like 30 seconds beforehand, we're also going to kind of close our eyes, envision like being like, waiting for the competition, and intentionally saying all, especially if you have like the cognitive version of distress, intentionally saying the anxious thoughts that your brain produces. So any thought that you don't want to have in your head, we are intentionally bringing it up, right? Because you're going to have to deal with that thought anyway, right? So might as well induce that thought a bunch of times, practice with it, and learn how to either habituate to it or describe relevance. Yes?
I have an idea for the crowd noise.
Yeah.
For the audio, you can also play a spotlight J&J, so you have the crowd that's cheering as
That's
the
actually
music,
a
and then
great
you have
call.
Robert Royston going,
That's a good
let's
idea.
dance.
But there's music,
Well,
right?
so
So
the music is with the crowd. You know what I mean?
oh, so literally play the spotlight and we're dancing to the music of the J&J and stuff
Yeah,
like
yeah.
That's
Because then,
great.
like, sometimes the
That's
crowd
really
feels like it's
Such-
reacting
such
to
a great
you.
idea,
Yeah,
such
and
a
you get
great
like Robert Royston down.
Yes, and then you only need one phone and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Like what we're doing, we're having like a real bring it on perspective to the challenge, right? Instead of trying to avoid it, instead of hoping that it doesn't come, we're saying, I know that it's going to come. This is a natural part of like being a human being that it's going to come. So I'm going to try to just practice it as many times as possible, so that when it comes, like I'm ready. Don't hit me, I'll hit me. Like I'm gonna induce the anxiety, and I will be used to it. Any questions or thoughts before we jump into it? And I'll probably stop recording for that sake, so we could all just like be more carefree, and I'll use my phone anyway.
Now that adds the anxiety.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It'll definitely add to the anxiety. It was great how real the anxiety
Oh my
felt.
God,
I
it's
think
so
when we
bad.
were experiencing. Any thoughts or questions before we jump into it?
I feel my shoulder shaking right now.
Good. Okay. And everyone watching, thanks for watching.